A few years ago, I made a video about how much I loved the first season of Andor, the Star Wars prequel to the events of Rogue One, a series that I went into completely blind after saying it would probably be really good Star Wars. And while at the time I could have never expected just how good it really was, the first season blew me away. On top of just being incredibly cinematic and incredibly well crafted, the blurring of the lines between morality, ethics, and evil was a certain level of nuance and maturity that was never seen in Star Wars then, or frankly since. Even some of the extended universe books and shows never really nailed the combination of consistent characterization, compelling main story, whip-smart dialogue, and award-worthy performances. The characters were unforgettable and cemented themselves as Star Wars icons and surpassed any expectations I had of them. Mon Mothma, for example, became my personal favorite, a task that I would have called impossible prior to that show. Luthen is one of the most singularly interesting examinations of necessary evils, and Cassian cemented himself as the pinnacle of protagonist writing and delivery that I think I've seen since a long time. Andor excelled because it was an incredible story that just so happened to be in the Star Wars universe. It's incredible because at its core, it really isn't Star Wars.
What is my sacrifice? I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see.
With all these massive expectations being met and then surpassed, everything was riding on season 2 of Andor. After delays, rumors of cancellation, and the community worried that maybe season 1 was a fluke and Gilroy and team would drop the ball, suffice to say that I was among the few that was anxious of season 2 letting me down. But man, they did the impossible. Season 2 of Andor is not just peak Star Wars, but improves on everything that season 1 did. The tension, the performances, the stakes, the characters, and the story all came full circle to create something truly special and unlike anything we've seen in Star Wars. It has solidified its claim as not just the best Star Wars possibly ever, but one of the best TV shows of the last 25 years.
We are under siege. We're being slaughtered. The imperial murder of Gorman has begun. There are hundreds of bodies this moment. As I say these words, hundreds of murdered Gorman lay dead in Vamo Plaza. Thousands more on the streets, more every minute. We're being destroyed. This is Gorman reaching for any open channel that can hear me. If you can hear me, if you believe in truth, if you have any faith left in truth, please march this message and pass it forward. This is murder! The Empire built this fire. They made this fire and led us to the slaughter. Now they expect us to die without knowing why. The conspiracy we feared is real. It's here today. Imperial ships are already landing across the sea. Help us! Is there no one who can help us? Is there no one?
The first chapter of season 2 is all about showcasing where our characters are and how they are trying to cope, move on from, and improve from the events of season 1. Prior, Ferrix, Cassian's home, has descended into full-on anarchy, throwing off the yoke of imperial oppression with violence and revolt. And as a result of that violence, all of our characters have fled and are trying to escape the gaze of the Empire and rebuild their spark. Cassian is fully under Luthen's sway, running dangerous missions and fulfilling the goals of Luthen's own rebellion. A rebellion that may not hold as much in common with the original one that we really thought it did. Bix, Brasso, and Wilman are trying to escape the death and disarray that they went under on Ferrix, retreating to a farming world where they hope that the Empire will never take notice of them. Now, dare I say it, but Cassian in this first chapter almost feels like he's having fun. He's suave, charismatic, and adaptable, playing enemies against one another through wit and will, all the while staying true to Luthen's cause. It's a wonderful expectation subversion, as what happens by episode 3 hits all the harder when Cassian's choices already begin to haunt him in very meaningful ways. Luthen, on the other side of the galaxy, continues his relentless foray into the Empire's weaknesses, striking small but effectively. His intense distrust of all those around him has created more enemies than allies, and his tenuous relationship with Saw Gerrera and the foundational creation of the rebels on Yavin have put him on a collision course with all of the major players that we come to know in future films. He isn't so much a force of nature as he is defying the forces of nature, refusing to bow down to the gusts of wind that threaten to tear off his theatrical disguise like cheap Velcro. And Mothma, reeling from the decision to sell out her daughter for the safety net of Chandrillan money, lives every day under constant anxiety and fear of what is to come.
Apparently it's a secret.
And as the Empire's violence grows, so does her distrust of Luthen and her growing fervor for anti-Palpatine sentiment. Syril has become fully embedded within the ISB, running as both a manager for his job and an undercover operative for ISB assignments. But while he struggles to maintain his status and pull himself from underneath the dominating machinations of his mother, his one shining light is Dedra. However, Dedra may not be as invested as he wants to believe. He's achieved most of the things he wanted, but is he really committed to the cause? And Dedra, I'll get into it later, but Dedra becomes one of my favorite characters in this show. Her relentless and vocally violent, fiercely intelligent personality has attracted the attention of director Krennic.
You think you're hard to read? You need to get over that. Now you have a plan already. You had it before they finished speaking. I want your assessment.
Who wants her heavily invested in a top-secret operation on the planet Gorman. And as her personal affairs overlap with her professional ones, it becomes increasingly clear that Dedra may have bitten off a little more than she can chew. These are the stakes established in just the first chapter. Everyone is seemingly on the back foot, struggling to gain ground and achieve the upper hand. But everyone is trying. Everyone is looking for the metaphorical silver bullet that will put an end to their adversaries once and for all. What I love in this opening chapter is how well it sets up the infighting within both the Empire and within the Rebellion. As Dedra is invited to a meeting with Director Krennic, we begin to see the full scope of the Empire's ambitions, but also why it feels so disjointed in places.
Synthetic calcites, calcite alternatives, calcite substitutes. I mean, the amount of time spent pondering this grubby little bit of rock is sadly astonishing.
Everyone has their own belief on how to achieve the goal, and everyone wants to be the one to do it. So even as they sit in unison at a table, when it comes time to disperse and socialize and network, we are privy to the plans that they are all making.
Or stage some natural disaster.
We've actually gamed that out. It gets unpredictable very quickly.
And how they share information that should not be shared.
We're building a new armory in Palmo.
Excuse me?
We're starting tomorrow.
Division isn't quite the word, but unity is still a long, ill-formed dream that the Empire has yet to solidify. There's a distinct cohesion within the ranks, but also a very distinct smell of distrust. Everyone is so cordial, so brash, and so sharp. Something that is not sustainable, a fact that we, as seers of the future, know all too well. And the Rebellion is even worse. Saw, Luthen, and Mothma all have different versions of the same dream. A galaxy united against Palpatine, but free of the potential oppression that could come with his inevitable downfall. To Mothma, this dream is somewhat more altruistic. While she makes hard decisions, she abhors violence and sees it as shocking and uncomely, and she can afford to think this way, standing atop her luxurious home in Coruscant, knowing nothing but a life of wealth and power.
Absolutely.
Luthen sees violence as a necessary evil, and yet he almost never pulls the trigger himself. By his own words, he is a coward, forced to use the tools of his enemy.
Now, the ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude.
And Saw? Well, Saw sees every end as justified if the means result in a blow against the Empire. While one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, Saw is less of a necessary evil and more the force of nature. The very one that Luthen stands against, albeit in a way that doesn't impede the storm that is Saw's actions. Saw won't be stopped, because he believes the only end to the Empire is total obliteration. And according to him, that is the only motive, with true clarity. And over the course of this season, you might agree with him.
The Gorman Front, the partisan alliance, sectorists, human cultists, galaxy petitionists, they're lost. All of them lost. I am the only one with clarity of purpose.
The chapter culminates in yet another tension-fueled skirmish between the survivors of Ferrix and an oncoming Imperial patrol. As Cassian struggles to find his way home after being waylaid by a group of rebels who cannot form a cohesive group and understand what he's trying to tell them, Bix and Brasso are betrayed by another civilian just wanting to protect his home, just to escape the crushing heel of the Empire, a decision made by so many throughout history. Because the Empire, see, they're going around there checking all the workers' visas under penalty of deportation to a prison or outright execution. And as they close in, a series of horrific things happen to these characters.
We've just shut down all the comms. It's not up to me, it's a policy. We freeze the zone during an audit. It's supposed to stop things sneaking away while we're doing all our counting.
Here is where we're going to talk about that scene, and why I see the methodology behind it, and why I think this anti-discourse is blown out of proportion and ignorant. Yes, there is an attempted rape scene between Bix and a sleazy Imperial officer, and yes, she uses the R word, so there's no mistaking what nearly happens. Here's the reality. This is not a show for the kids. Star Wars was pretty much dominantly focused on the implication of more heinous crimes without giving voice to them, but Andor was always about giving a clear voice to atrocities. This was very clear from Season 1 and the Aldhani arc all the way up until now. The Empire is not meant to be anything other than an abuse of power to the utmost degree. And while I believe there is something to be said about feeling uncomfortable, what do you think war is supposed to be? Horrible things happen to people that do not deserve it. Bix has gone through a lot prior to this, and here is the catalyst for her further degradation of resolve and inability to heal. It's a powerful moment that drives home just how terrible the Empire is, and just how strong Bix is. You're not meant to take it at face value, but you are meant to discuss it. In which case, you can't really disagree with me here. It did what it was meant to do. While Bix fights off the unwanted advances, Brasso is ultimately gunned down by stormtroopers despite Cassian's last moment arrival and his heroic attempts to halt it. And so, by the skin of their necks, Wilman, Bix, and Cassian escape, leaving behind our beloved B2 and Brasso's body forever left as an indentation in the tall wheat field as a reminder of the callous violence of the Empire. And Cassian knows this. He may not be vocalizing it, whether for his sake or for his friends, but he knows that he is ultimately responsible for not saving Brasso. He may not have pulled the trigger himself, but it's a domino effect that will have irreparable consequences on his world. And sometimes violence is in the mind and in the soul, as we see Mon Mothma continue to make preparations for her daughter's wedding. An event mixed with joy, solitude, despair, and impending horror. Various threads become entangled and dangerous. Luthen's unexpected arrival to the ceremony throws a wrench in an already calamitous mix of ingredients.
Luthen!
Oh dear, you found me.
What are you doing here?
I'm afraid that's a secret.
Genevieve O'Reilly's acting in this arc is nothing short of astounding, by the way. She says so much with just her body language and her eyes than a million words could ever describe. The way she stares longingly at her daughter, hoping for a reversal of fortune, is heartbreaking. The way she looks and speaks to Luthen in fear and to Tay Kolma in almost a scolding manner, never having been so close to such violence, is terrifying.
How I wish you'd made this clear sooner.
Yeah, I should have. Perhaps I thought it was obvious. If I haven't, I'm sorry for that.
Mon hopes for some white knight, some savior to put an end to the madness and save her daughter from a life of servitude and disillusion.
I need to tell you what my mother never told me. Look at me. Nothing on the other side of that door matters. Not the guests, not the gifts, not the trouble that's gone into it. None of it matters.
But as the stakes mount and the terror comes to the forefront, she can't do anything other than watch, beg, and dance. And this is why this show is so effective from the onset. The tension is already mounting. You can sense underneath all of these threads something big is coming. You don't quite know what it is, but there's just too many coincidences. Too many characters are overlapping, so you know something has to happen. But right now, it's all about the inability to unionize. Whether it's the rebellion, the empire, the farmers, everybody is backpedaling.
Some people don't think it's a good idea to commemorate a massacre in the center of town. Is that you? Do I mind?
Yeah.
I needn't be reminded. I was there.
The stakes are set. The potential fallout is massive. Our characters are more aligned with the cause than ever before. Sort of. As Cassian flees to Coruscant with Bix, Wilman becomes fully embroiled in the rebellion, and the machinations of Dedra become more cloudy as she descends with religious fervor onto the oppressed world of Gorman. Saw's increased descent into distrust and outright madness is on full display as he enlists Wilman into a series of terrorist actions that will forever change him as a person. Wilman is given the eponymous task of sabotaging a planet unless he also wants to be shot in the face. And while an argument could be made that this is Wilman's evolution as a character and his radicalization to the rebellion full tilt,
Let it in, boy. That's freedom calling. Let it in. Let it run. Let it run wild.
another argument can be made that the point of this whole arc is to show Saw's full evolution into the radical terrorist that we know him as in Rogue One, a man of mythic proportions that acts in secret and tramples anyone in his path. And while all the characters do get the spotlight thanks to Gilroy's masterful writing and pacing, I would make the argument this chapter is where Syril establishes himself as one of the best written characters in modern TV history. We watch him struggle to assert his independence when his mother infantilizes him in front of Dedra. And while Dedra is who he hoped would allow him to be fully himself, her dialogue insinuates that she's controlling him as much as his mother is, albeit in a very different manner.
Dedra was just telling me how well you're doing here.
Was she? That's interesting.
While Syril finds new purpose in the praise of the ISB and his newfound mission to Gorman, where Dedra has instructed him to establish a series of instigators to make way for Imperial intervention, Syril takes this newfound task with a surprising amount of courage and dedication, ingratiating himself to the local resistance and feeding them information that won't do anything other than get them in trouble, or worse, killed. And as the Empire lays the groundwork for something big, Syril feeds them information on the Resistance movements while acting as a local manager in the Imperial office on Gorman. And of course, the local Resistance doesn't trust him and plants listening devices in his office, which is all a part of the grand plan of the ISB. Syril's arc is not so much of an evolution as it is just a continuing sad tragedy of a man who felt he was destined for so much more.
They started breaking into the apartment. I know they're tapping the office comms. I assume I'm being followed all the time.
As he continues to feed both sides, he finds himself growing weary of the Empire, but not enough to further a substantial disillusionment. At least, not yet. The pot is bubbling, the ingredients needed for the ISB to do something drastic that we aren't privy to. The tension in the air is becoming palpable and thick enough to feel with your fingers. Cassian's growing distrust of Luthen threatens to upend potential alliances.
I give you everything. Is this everything? This fury, this lack of control? Violating every protocol we live by?
Alliances that in turn refuse to join the growing rebellion in an effort to protect their Gorman home.
A new front line against the Empire? A chance for that, that's a triumph. Think about a planet like Gorman in rebellion. A planet of wealth and status.
But this chapter is all about seeing the mixture come to a boil. While Chapter 3 upends the pot and spills the hot and violent contents sprawling across the floor, threatening to burn anyone who gets a little bit too close. I won't mince words in this chapter, and I say it with my chest that this is as good as Star Wars can ever be. It delivers on every front, creating tension so tense that I found myself locked into the screen with a fervency I haven't felt since the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. But I would argue that Chapter 3 pushes past that tension and then some. Everything is in place. Luthen and Cassian are suspicious of one another, and Cassian finds himself on Yavin, softly joining the official rebellion under the command of Draven. And while Cassian seems somewhat content, a chance encounter with a Force-sensitive healer dissolves that contentment into a flurry of anxiety and fear of what's to come. And while we aren't privy to what he sees, we can make some guesses. And Wilman arrives with information that Dedra is on Gorman, that she is the linchpin to the hunt for the rebellion. Cassian ultimately decides to travel to Gorman and attempt to assassinate her alongside the local resistance. And as Syril becomes increasingly distrustful of the ISB and Dedra, it all culminates in the most intense 47 minutes of TV I have ever seen.
We'll be back in Coruscant. We'll be together. We'll be rewarded.
For what? What have we accomplished?
The Empire's presence on Gorman increases tenfold. TIE fighters scream overhead in a show of deafening force. Officers and stormtroopers amass in the plaza and erect barricades to entice dissent from the local resistance. Troopers stand guard. The people begin to yell and gather. The yells become uniform, a singular voice crying out to the Empire with only one distinct meaning. You are not welcome here, and we will be still no longer. This chant becomes a wailing, a mystic chant that could seem to summon spirits as much as lift them. The crowd becomes a throng, and the throng becomes a chorus. As Dedra stares on in abject uncertainty, Syril makes it a point to make his final demand of her.
How long?
We can discuss this later.
It's too late already.
Syril, please.
You're gonna tell me what this has really been about?
You're hurting me.
And you are going to tell me what the mining ships are doing here. You couldn't even wait. Don't.
As he learns the ugly truth, this was the plan all along. He was a pawn, a necessary cog in the machine to make use of the Gorman people. The Empire wanted this uprising all along. They just needed an excuse. And Syril played that excuse right into their hands. The Gorman chorus becomes a battle cry, a sacred song sung to the heavens with bravado and desperation. Desperation to be free. But as they sing, as they beg with chords and verses, we see the pieces moving. Cassian trying to locate Dedra, a device passing between protesters, a sniper, TIE fighters. Something is moving, something is stirring. And it builds, the tension reaches a fever pitch, the voices of the oppressed drowned by a climbing score. Cassian's confidence slowly eroded by doubt and fear. Syril stumbles through the crowd, begging to be seen and to be heard, if only by his presence and silence. He wants to stop whatever is going to happen. The crowd swells, stormtroopers line the stairs, blocking the exits. The tension builds and builds and builds. The Gorman massacre begins. The Empire's full intent is displayed in a sickening abuse of power and manipulation. A sniper that kills one of his own men to spark a reaction. Stormtroopers firing wildly into the crowd, killing indiscriminately, with no regard as to if they're a threat or not. Women are thrown to the ground by droids, elders are shot with disregard, and everyone is subject to death. As the Gore try to fight back, these brave fighters we've come to know over the last 4 episodes are all gunned down by troops. Their lifeless bodies limp and unable to fight back, silent mouths unable to scream, and still eyes unable to plead. It's too much. It will always be too much. As Syril stares around him in horror and disconnect, the screams of the dying and the whiz of blaster bolts surrounds him in sensory horror he can never unhear or unsee. He tries to find meaning, to find something to hold on to ground himself. But instead, he sees something to fight. And so we get to the tragedy of Andor, the trampling of the small person underneath the giant boot of the Imperial. Syril may just be one of the finest examples, but this happens to everybody. To Luthen, to Cassian, to Mon Mothma, to Bix, to Wilman, to Brasso, to B2, to Kino Loy, to everybody. The Empire cares nothing for how you feel about them. They hold the power. You are meaningless. And it isn't until this moment of horrific violence that Syril truly gets it.
You tell me it's a rumor, and I will throw you out that window. What have we been doing here?
The real tragedy of Syril and why he's so emblematic of this unifying theme in this story is that he was ultimately a good man. A good man misguided by a corrupt government, but one that he believed to be altruistic and orderly. He only ever wanted the approval of his peers and the contentment of a life well lived. In many ways, while their actions would seem directly conflicting, he and Cassian share a lot in common, a theme that is clearly intentional by Gilroy. Syril found purpose and structure, and when that structure was threatened, he responded by asking questions and finding his interests conflicted. He saw the cracks in the Empire through Dedra and the ISB, cracks that would become canyons of doubt and uncertainty. He was so sure of his ability to be a good man that he stopped in his tracks by a simple question from someone who's been at the center of his rage for years.
Who are you?
It's tragic to see someone so close to knowing the truth and knowing to change, and yet to see it ended so quickly and without compromise is sickening. But it's real. The real world rarely allows for the heroic death rattle as you lay on your back and then someone swoops in at the last minute and saves you. That's for the movies, and in a lot of ways, Andor almost feels like a direct dissection of film and sci-fi and Star Wars. Syril's death is scary and upsetting. But he was supposed to be the bad guy, right? I mean, we don't feel good that Syril is dead, and yet here we are. His body nothing but a reminder of what he could have been and who he should have been. Instead, all we can do is mourn and bemoan a life lost before its chance to shine brightly. Something seen in conflicts throughout history. People with an amazing life ahead of them that will never get to see it to fruition. Now, the other side of this is what it does to somebody who's directly responsible for it. Dedra comes to a horrifying realization that for all her sharp wit and clever use of vocabulary to instill obedience and fear, she is just as close to death as everyone else in this story. And whether it was the screams of the innocent, the knowing that Syril's dead somewhere beneath her feet, or her fear of what this genocide will ignite, she is reduced to spasms and gasps. Purely physical reactions, devoid of any clever dialogue or emotionally charged sentences. All she can do is weep. But it's almost as though she's forgotten how, as if the years of apathy and years of oppression which she has been directly responsible for and which she has seen played out on two different planets to varying degrees of violence and death, it's almost as though her body and her mind can't allow her that weakness, no matter how badly it wants to, no matter how badly it wants to burst out of the seams and rage at the world that she's helped create. But she can't admit to that. So instead, all she does is suppress it, and suppresses it poorly. The damage is done. The fire is lit. And as the embers of Gorman drift into the stars, they will ignite a wildfire that will eventually burn the Empire to the ground. The screams of the Gorman were not lost on the radio. It wouldn't live on only in Cassian's fractured memory, and it certainly wouldn't be forgotten by the few who survive.
This is murder! The Empire built this fire. They made this fire and led us to the slaughter. Now they expect us to die without knowing why.
Mon Mothma knows full well the scale of what Gorman may become. She knows that the time has never been more apt for something to be said, tired of waiting, of watching the Empire grow more bold and more controlling than ever before, watching as the Imperial propaganda machine spews misinformation to the masses. Gorman wasn't a massacre, it was an appropriate response to a riot. And sure, we've never seen a real-world government justify a genocide before. Mon refuses the call to stand down, to bide her time and do nothing.
I can't take it anymore. And yes, I know there's no telling what the Emperor is capable of at this At this point, anything is possible, but they've gone too far, and we all know it.
With the guidance of Bail Organa and a voice powerful enough to shake the heavens, she musters all of her courage and delivers what will go down in history as one of the finest monologues, one of the most timely monologues, and setting a new benchmark for Star Wars politicism and rallying cries.
The loss of an objective reality is perhaps the most dangerous.
The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil.
When truth leaves us, when we let it slip away, when it is ripped from our hands,
we become vulnerable to the appetite of whatever monster screams the loudest.
What happened yesterday on Gorman was unprovoked genocide. Yes, genocide. And that truth has been exiled from this chamber.
Everything is coming full circle. The connections to Rogue One, to Rebels, and A New Hope have never been clearer. As Cassian extracts Mon Mothma and makes his way back to Yavin 4, Tony Gilroy is not done with breaking us emotionally. We just went through hell with these characters, and surely we're done with it in this arc, right? No.
And when it's done, when it's over, and we've won, we can do all the things we ever wanted. Everything we know we've missed. I'll find you.
To say that I felt my heart sink in this moment is a massive understatement. Gilroy has done such an unbelievably strong job with this writing and these characters that I was almost hoping for Bix to die so that Cassian's death in Rogue One would feel somewhat less tragic, but instead, it just hurts even more. Knowing that Cassian had the biggest reason to live, the best reason to make it off of Scarif, and the most amount of love to give for the rebellion, only to face his end with a friend he just met and that just lost everything it's so unfair. And unfair is something that Star Wars fans are not used to, because until now, Star Wars was pure escapism. But if these last 6 episodes proved anything, it's that escapism isn't always real, and it doesn't make for believable motivations and characters. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was crying at this arc finale.
You're finished.
You're too late. The rebellion isn't here anymore. It's flown away. It's everywhere now.
As a fondly remembered character would now say, I don't like loose ends. And the last arc of Andor is all about tying up those loose ends and making these characters pay for their actions either through reward or through justice. Dedra's commitment to finding Axis, the name given to this mysterious rebel leader, eventually brings her right to Luthen's door, literally. Right after Luthen was made aware of the creation of the Death Star, kickstarting the events that would happen in Rogue One.
Fronting for what?
A weapon. Orson Krennic's been building a secret weapon for over a decade.
While not one of these core characters know what that is right now, one thing is clear. It's time to abandon Coruscant. The city that once harbored the Jedi, the Republic, and the ideal center of democracy is now a hotbed of oppression, violence, and impending martial law.
With the mindless decision to confront Luthen Rail on your own! If you're not a rebel spy, you missed your calling.
And as Krennic grills Dedra for information and Luthen attempts to tie up his own loose ends, Clea sends one final plea for help to come. But Dedra's arrogance and contempt for Luthen and Andor makes her sloppy. And one thing is for certain with the Empire, if you get sloppy, the bill comes due.
We need agents at every transit point we can cover.
We'll do our best to carry on without you.
Cassian at this point in his arc is more or less the Cassian that we'd come to know in Rogue One. He seems almost happy for the first time in this story, absent any outside circumstances. And as he joyfully makes memories with his friends, the inevitable happens. Wilman receives Clea's cry for help, and it's a race to Coruscant that will kick off the events of Rogue One and create a series of dominoes toppling over into what will become A New Hope. Andor succeeds in large part due to its phenomenal writing. All characters remain consistent and true to themselves, feeling more akin to real-life historical figures than they do to fictional sci-fi ones. Dedra, Syril, and Luthen are masterclass examples of how to write shades of gray, moral conflict, and inability or even refusal to change. While all of them come close at various points to redeeming their own issues with leadership and power, these are also what are ultimately their undoing.
Think about a planet like Gorman in Rebellion. A planet of wealth.
If it goes up in flames,
it will burn very brightly.
Clea, Bix, and Mothma are stellar examples of the latter. They start out as ultimately good people who are driven to do terrible things because of the pain and humiliation that they experience at the hands of the Empire. Damages to their soul and morality so deep the wound will never fully heal.
There's a research center. Galen Erson, say it.
Clear.
Repeat what I've told you!
And Cassian, one of the greatest written protagonists in fiction. Full stop. This character of moral gray that is rounded out by a deep love for his friends and a gradual radicalization towards anti-colonial sentiment is stunning. Watching him grow from a cowardly murderer to a leader of the rebellion and a caretaker of the weak was one of the most beautiful character arcs I've ever had the joy of watching.
When I say I know Luthen, I mean I know the good and the bad. I know what was wrong with him, but it's insulting to hear him run down by people who have given a fraction of his sacrifice to this rebellion.
Enough! That's why Andor is so good. Because it isn't really about Star Wars. It's not about Cassian and Bix and Luthen and Krennic. It's about me and you and us. None of these would matter if the story was terrible. If the cinematography wasn't good or the music failed to capture the emotions of these characters. But that's the thing. It isn't just good writing and filmmaking from the stance of characters good. It's good writing and filmmaking because everything in Andor works to full capacity. Every small moment, every line of dialogue, every shot serves to further the underlying story of Andor at its center.
Don't you dare.
What I'm telling you cannot be shared. I have friends everywhere.
Whether it's a prison escape, a heist, a massacre, or a political speech, everything in Andor is in service to the ending theme. That rebellion comes from a dark place, but that doesn't rob it of its beauty. These are important stories to tell. In a world where history is rife with Imperials that were only halted by the rebellion of a brave few that became many, this is a story as timely as it gets. A story that rebellion may start out as those brave few, but it will rapidly become a chorus, a swelling voice that will carry its people on a tidal wave of hope. We have a lot to learn from Andor. From its characters to the beautiful cinematography that perfectly captures the rising tide of trust and hope, to its music that perfectly captures dread, beauty, and tragedy. These characters have so much to tell us, and we have so much to learn from them. Rebellion isn't pretty. The war may feel never ending, but someday, somewhere, and someone will break through the clouds and shine a light on it all. We may not be around to see it. Hell, we may even die for believing in it, and we may even find ourselves agreeing with the oppressors. But the tools are there for you to break free of your conditioning, be it political, judicial, or economical. No one controls your fate. The rebellion is all up to us.
I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea that they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And then remember this. The Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that. And know this, that they will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this. Try.
With all that being said, man, who the fuck is Cassian's kid and who the fuck is his sister?